Okay. Bismillah walhamdulillah wassalatu wassalam ala rasulillah wa ala alihi wa sahbihi ajma'een. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuhu. I'm just giving a moment for people to get their notifications and join us, inshallah. So just bear with me for a minute. Okay, inshallah. Assalamu alaikum to those of you who are joining us, and welcome to this live Q&A session. My name is Ruhi, and I am a research fellow here at Yaqeen Institute, and thank you for joining me. Inshallah, I'll be answering questions on a paper that I wrote that was published a couple of weeks ago, and the topic is overcoming pessimism with faith. So I want to make this interactive. So inshallah, if you have any questions, please feel free to put them in the comments section below, and we'll try to include them in the discussion. And for those of you maybe who haven't read the paper yet, just go ahead and add your thoughts as we go through this. I'll try to include some highlights of the paper as well, inshallah. And introduce yourself. Let's make it interactive if possible. That'd be great. Assalamu alaikum to everyone who's joining. Okay, so the motivation for this paper, why I chose to write about this topic. I mean, as the title suggests, if you really think about it, pessimism is a word that, and a feeling, I should say, that's resonating with a lot of people these days. You know, you turn on the news, and of course there's a lot of adversity in the world, and there's turmoil throughout, no matter where you live, and that's in addition to what we as human beings obviously experience in our daily lives. You know, we're going through all kinds of ups and downs, and at times we don't know how to put that into perspective. We don't know where to take it. You know, inshallah, the hope with this paper is that we really have a very practical methodology that we can apply, because at the core of our deen is that Islam is really all about hope. It's one of the most core principles of our religion. And sometimes that can get lost for people. The danger in it, particularly for us as Muslims, is not only how do I see the light at the end of the tunnel, I don't know where I'm going tomorrow, but that also to really be able to understand that, you know, there needs to be some perspective. There needs to be something that I can do to be able to get that and realize that kind of everlasting or lasting and real optimism in my life. So inshallah, you know, that's really the intent with which I approach the paper. And I am actually, this is one of those first experiences for me with Facebook Live. So if I look like I'm a little distracted, I'm trying to read what's coming up on the screen as well. But bear with me, inshallah, and I'll try to answer any questions that you might have. I would recommend that you read the paper. If you go to our website, yaqeeninstitute.org, under the research tab, you'll be able to find this as well as all of our publications. And this really falls into, I think, what we're trying to do as part of our mission at Yaqeen, which is really to build conviction, you know, to really have that certainty in our hearts that the danger for us as Muslims is when we start to doubt. We doubt ourselves, we're potentially doubting our deen, and in fact studies are showing that is actually what is happening, not just within the community at large in terms of the global community, but also it is happening within the Muslim community. And you know, we'd like to be able to focus in on what our deen teaches us in this regard. And so my purpose in writing this paper was to go back to the Quran and the Sunnah and really look at what fuels optimism in our lives. There are lots of studies being done out there, a number of various disciplines. You know, you look at the fields of psychology and philosophy and science, neuroscience, even those who just want to have a more productive life. It's human nature to want to be happy, to want to have a positive outlook. But unfortunately, for many people, that's a struggle. That's a real struggle. And so what we're finding is that these studies are out there. Money is being spent trying to identify tools that we can use. And what we find in Islam is that not only does it present a message of hope, but actually that idea of optimism and the glass being half full, actually the glass is brimming over. And that's not just perception, that is a promise from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala for the believers. Allah's mercy is upon us. These are the prevailing messages in Islam. And what I started to look at were some steps in terms of how can we realize that, starting with going back 1400 years and looking at the life of the Prophet ﷺ and the fact that he had to endure and faced him, and as well as the early Muslims at that time faced so much adversity. We look at what we're going through today, we kind of live in a little bit of a bubble that, you know, this is what it is today is, oh my goodness, it's never been like this before. But of course we know that history repeats itself, and that there are throughout history we can think of accounts where things have actually been, situations have been very, very, very difficult for humanity, for you know, Muslims as well as for in general for the world. And 1400 years ago that was prevalent. We had injustice, we had you know, Islamophobia at its highest, particularly in the earlier stages of the seerah, of the life of the Prophet ﷺ. So inshallah, I'm hoping that some of you have had a chance to look at the paper and maybe you have some questions. You know, the first sort of obvious question to get things started is, you know, really how do I get to that? How do I even begin on this journey to bring myself to a place of optimism when I see so much suffering around me? And that's a very real question and a very natural question to ask. And what I really start with is the basis of this is Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala tells us in the Quran that He has sent us in the Quran, in the revelation itself, and in this message of Islam, He has sent us what He refers to as, you know, instruction, guidance, that the Quran is actually shifa. It's a form of cure for what ails us inside. And it's a mercy. And in fact, he goes as far as to say that this is something to rejoice about. And one morning I was reading that ayah, and in fact, if you read the entire passage, it's in Surah Yunus, starting with ayah 57, you'll find that it's a beautiful passage because it really addresses this dilemma that, you know, when we don't know where to go. Today I might be feeling a little low about something, or maybe it's something more than that. I might be feeling a sense of fear about the future. And of course there's very real suffering in the world, we know that. And as human beings, whether we're going through it or somebody else is going through it, that empathy has to be there naturally, just as being human. And so it's hard for us to see these images coming across our screen every day, though we obviously need to be aware and need to know and need to do what we can to alleviate that distress from others. We do feel it. We're affected by it. And as I said, you know, studies are showing Muslims are affected by this along with everyone else. And particularly when some of that negativity, in fact, much of it in the media, is targeting Islam. So where do I begin on that journey? And so Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is saying, look, I've given you something that will, that is the answer. This is where you start looking for your answers. And he goes on to say, but most people aren't grateful. So, you know, we don't always recognize, we don't keep it in the forefront. That's where we look at the life of the Prophet ﷺ to see how did he implement it. And, you know, and the number one thing, and I'll tell you this, and then I'm going to just, you know, I'm hoping that inshallah you might have some questions off of this, but with the Prophet ﷺ, if you look at the backbone of his existence is his connection with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, right? As a messenger of Allah. And, you know, we look to see how every moment in a typical 24-hour period for him, he is remembering Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And the very powerful message behind that for all of us is that we're never really alone. We can feel alone when we look at negative emotions, and pessimism is one of them, but it is an entire spectrum on which, you know, people may be suffering and going through difficulty right now. And for whatever difficulty you're experiencing, to know that you are not alone is an extremely powerful tool, and this is something that is realized when we know our Creator, when we know Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and we connect to Him and we call on Him. And that is exactly what the Prophet ﷺ was doing, no matter what situation he faced. And of course there was so much hardship. I talk about that in the paper in terms of the challenges he faced, but also how he was always able to smile through it. And this was real. This was not, this is not something figurative. He actually had that inner sense of contentment and optimism, which exuded in everything he did and in every situation, and where he would look at the positive in that situation and trust in Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Another tool that is an important one for us to realize is to always, think well of our Creator, to think well of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, to understand and to know that all good comes from Him. So inshallah, before I really get too much further into the paper, any thoughts, please feel free to join the discussion here. And assalamu alaikum to everyone who's joined since we started. I'm just actually looking through some of these comments here with you, inshallah, so that I can keep up and see if so yes, this is the paper here is Overcoming Pessimism with Faith. And so it's a discussion of optimism. That is actually, and salams to all of you, inshallah. Thank you for joining. Okay, so I don't see anybody asking anything at this point here. So yes, inshallah. So Romana is asking, can you please give us a quick synopsis of your paper? And that is actually what I have started doing. So again, the overall message of the paper is one of optimism, and that the true source of that optimism is our deen. It is Islam. In fact, it is what makes Islam so attractive to people, and that is part of what drew people to the Prophet ﷺ, was the message itself that he brought, because clearly this is a message of mercy, of hope. Above all, it is truth. And along with that, he had this sense of optimism in the way he conducted himself, and truly what he believed was always going to result in a positive outcome. And that's really, as human beings, what we're searching for naturally. That's what it means to be human, and it's a test of life. Somebody's asking, why would we want to overcome? Well, we would want to overcome pessimism. So Frida, the objective is to overcome the negative thoughts that come up for us, and to be optimistic, to have a positive outlook on our lives. And what we start with, as I mentioned earlier, is our connection with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and maintaining that connection throughout our experiences. So not just that I'm happy when things seem to be going well, because that's my perception, that things are going well, yet we are placed on this earth by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala with a purpose, to worship Him, to call on Him, and to obey and live within the paradigm that we've been given with the Quran and the Sunnah. And inshallah, we, in order to do that, yes, of course, we're going to face challenges, and it's human to feel these emotions. And a part of what I talk about in the paper, which is very important, is not to deny those emotions. This is something that I think is another very powerful message. So the first one is this connection to Allah, to recognize that you're not alone. And the second very powerful message that I want to share from this paper is that it's not something necessarily that religion and emotion means I just pray to God and I forget about the way I'm feeling, or I try to bury the way I'm feeling. Sometimes people are going through some very serious issues in their lives, and it's extremely important for us to recognize that we have to acknowledge that it is human to grieve, it is human to feel pain. And in fact, the message of the Quran, there's so many examples that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is giving us of the messengers of Allah, perhaps one of the biggest wisdoms there, that they are human, that they will go through these experiences, and they did. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala fortified them. He fortified them with, training them with tests. In fact, we know that the prophets of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala are tested more than we are. And this is something that they experienced, and I give examples in the paper of the stories that many of you are already familiar with, that of Ibrahim alayhi salam, that of Musa alayhi salam, that of Yusuf alayhi salam, and of course our Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, who went through tremendous trials, far more than maybe you and I would, go through collectively, like in that manner in our lives. And in that is also a sign that being tested doesn't necessarily equal distancing from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, or that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is not that He's not pleased with you. In fact, this can also be a sign that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala loves you more. And so He fortified the messengers with this tremendous sense of reliance, tawakkul as we say, on Him, and that enabled them to be able to acknowledge that yes, there is real fear, there is danger, there is grief, but with that there is this optimism that I believe wholeheartedly that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala wants good for me, and the outcome of the good is always going to be greater than perhaps even what appears to me right now as evils or difficulties or stresses in the world around me. And that's exactly how the messengers of Allah alayhim salam, they all succeeded and were able to become such tremendous role models and draw people to the faith, to Islam, and to the belief in Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Wiyaakum, alhamdulillah. So please feel free to add your thoughts and your questions to this, inshallah. We have a few minutes left, so I'd like to make sure that if anybody has questions. Okay, just reading through some of these. Yes, so Frida is reminding us of a hadith, Qudsi, that I am as my servant expects of me, and that's exactly what the message is here, is that even though we perceive difficulty around us, and I use the word difficulty very generally here, but of course there is tremendous suffering. We can use the examples of what we're seeing happening in the ummah across the globe, and it is very difficult, it is very severe. Even in these severe tests though, and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has told us that you will be tested with fear, you will be tested with loss of life and loss of wealth, and so these are things that are part of the tests of life. But with that, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala reminds us every step of the way of His rahmah, the fact that He is Ar-Rahman and Ar-Rahim, and in that we find comfort, because one might say, well, how do the two go together? Oftentimes, a question that people wrestle with, and that builds doubts for people, is that if God is good, then why is there so much suffering? And it's a very deep and profound question, and yes, indeed, as being asked, people often point to that and say that's a lack of iman, or they say there's a lot of explanations that are given out there. But the first place to start with is to understand and know Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, that His mercy always prevails, and in that even when we perceive things to be difficult and we perceive there to be real evils in the world, there are many wisdoms behind that, many of which Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has given us, and we have that as direct explanations in the Quran. For example, that there are it very well is at times a wake-up call, and that this is an opportunity for you to turn back to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Allah is calling for people. Even the person who claims that he does not or she does not believe in God, when stuck in a situation where they're facing immense fear, will automatically call out to God for help. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala mentions ayat like this in the Quran. And also for those who are using it for, what should our attitude as a believer be? Because say, well, I'm trying to do the right thing. And so here, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, well, this is a way for you to come back to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. This is a way for you to straighten yourself and make sure that, I seek forgiveness every step of the way. I look to better myself. And as I said, with the example of the prophets, that sometimes it is simply Allah wants to raise you in rank. He wants to reward you. He wants to give you more. So, inshallah, let me just see here. There's some comments coming in. Okay. So I'm actually just trying to, I think there's a little bit of a lag on my computer here. So Romana Yasmin, thank you for your question. Jazakallah khair. Do you tackle the issue of end-of-life issues, death, and what happens after death? Life is beautiful, but we also have to face death. I believe there are a lot of unanswered questions in reference to this, which can be scary or hard to deal with. Those are very valid points. That's not the topic that I don't get into those issues in this paper in particular. Inshallah, that would actually be a fantastic topic for us to explore and write about further, because this is a little bit more of a general look at overcoming negativity and finding lasting optimism. But in a general sense, yes, it is very much connected to optimism, because we know when we come here as human beings that ultimately as Muslims, our belief is we are returning back to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So if you look at the Quran and you look at the message of hope there, every time there is something mentioned, in fact, you'll see it often in the Quran where Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala might mention something that is displeasing to Him, or a behavior that He wants us to, of the people of the past that have committed in the way of kufr or disbelief in Allah. And then, when the believer's heart starts to tremble, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala immediately mentions the blessings and the reward and the perseverance of the believers, and how that will be rewarded with a place in Jannah. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala created us to crave and to look for and to want to be happy, and that promise is always there. And even those who have so as believers, it is actually a very optimistic religion when you look at Islam in comparison to those faiths that don't address what happens after death, or don't have any sense of the accountability and then paradise and so on. So different faith systems, different beliefs, and of course those who don't believe in God at all. And we see that can put people in a frame where they're really lost. Whereas the paradigm of Islam has always got something beautiful awaiting us. And so inshallah, this is actually one of the things that can separate and distinguish Islam, is how we deal with death in general. It is actually far, far more optimistic than other belief systems or theories out there. And so hopefully, inshallah, that answers your question. Any other questions? I'm just going to look back in the comments again. I see something else here from... Okay, so glad for this. This is Sahram. I hope I am pronouncing your name correctly. Assalamu alaikum. Jazakallah khair for your question. So the commenter is glad for this. I think... an issue sometimes faced in maintaining optimism is enduring a situation, working towards change, or leaving bad situations altogether, to come face to face or to ignore, to stay or to leave, for women. So yes, I mean, inshallah, you're asking about women, but I would say that take it to all situations. And if you really look at this paper, one of the things about this is we can apply it in every aspect of our life. And so whatever our struggle may be, whether it's with our children, whether it is as women, whether it is in the course of something that we're experiencing in our professional or personal lives, and of course as a community, and of course as an ummah going forward. So in all situations, but personally, let's bring it to the personal level here, going back to what I mentioned, tawakkul and trust in Allah. And again, I talk about this in the paper. But what that really means, also the concept of perseverance and patience, because sabr is used in the Quran a lot, right? That Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is with the people who show sabr, the sabirin. And who are these people? It's not just sufficient in English to say that they're patient and that you're waiting for something to change, but that actually part of that, the scholars have got into lengthy discourse about this, is that you are in action, you're consistent, you stay the course. And that's a part of the paper that really talks about, I've discussed this, where look at the examples, again, in the Quran we have numerous examples that are far more than just, stories that we know them, but really when you analyze them, they give us this kind of course to take. And so when you look at that fear factor of what do I do, which way do I go, and how do I move forward, tawakkul is really that, is that you're going to keep moving. The Prophet defined and described life as a journey. We're a traveler, that we just stop for a little while he said, to sit under a tree. And that's how we are. If we just stop and stay still, the biggest force that out there that we're facing that will cripple us is shaitan. As human beings, he's our arch enemy, right? So that's what he's going to do. He's going to try to stop you from moving forward. And so there are examples when, whether it be on the battlefield as described in the Quran, or whether it be Musa alayhi salam facing, he's got Pharaoh on his back and he's got his people and they're facing the Red Sea in front of them. All of these examples show us that they would keep going in the face of that danger. And in fact, a beautiful thought that I'll kind of, I see the time is running short, that I was just thinking about this morning, is that, when sakina, when tranquility comes from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, look at the examples of when He says, I place tranquility in their hearts for the believers in the Quran. He mentions it at times that are actually some of the most difficult times. For example, you take the example at Hudaybiyah. When in the seerah, when the Muslims came with their hearts so full of hope to be able to do Umrah with the Prophet ﷺ, to return to their homeland for many of them after so many years, and they could not, and it wasn't Allah's will, yet He calls this a victory, because they did turn back, and at one time they thought they might have to fight the Quraysh, but in actuality Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says that you were willing to stand by. They stood by the Prophet ﷺ and they took the pledge with him to stand by him and stand with him, and even though they were unarmed, that they would face the enemy if needed. But Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala not only protected them, returned them home safe, but they got to come back and they got to perform the Umrah, and of course eventually they would be able to return to Makkah successful, and the deen would prevail. And so these are examples for us that when at a time when it looked as though there was some imminent danger there, real danger, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala talks about this, that in Surah Fath, that He placed sakina, He gave them tranquility to be able to take that situation and turn it into something positive and keep going. So I hope that answers your question, and inshallah I hope that I haven't missed anything here. Okay, one more maybe. Abdul Ar-Rahman, what's the quick method to get positive energy back and not to stick to the negative thoughts? The first thing is to always just think of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala as He loves me, He created me, He knows me better than I know myself. Sometimes I put goals out there for myself that I think are good, and we pray for barakah in our efforts, obviously, that for Allah to guide us to what is good for us. And if it's not happening the way that I would like it to happen, the way to return to positivity is to recognize and trust that Allah is always going to want something that's better for me. And we know that famous hadith, right? That when you are making dua to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, that your dua is never wasted, and that the believer makes dua with certainty. The Prophet ﷺ instructed us that make dua with certainty that your dua will be answered. You may see it immediately, you may not see it immediately, it may be stored up as a reward for you later in the akhirah, or some other harm may be averted. This is all authentically narrated to us. So this is easiest way and the fastest way for us to remember. And a big part of this, because I want to finish, because one more point that I think is a crucial point. So we had the connection to Allah, knowing we're not alone. Just to summarize, we had the idea of not burying our emotions, but rather rechanneling them to Allah. Give them to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, so that He will guide the way, but stay on course, stay in action. Don't give up, don't let shaitan get in the way and threaten us. And a big part that I want to kind of, along with that tawakkul, is gratitude. Be grateful for the things that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has given us. We don't always see those blessings. And if you look at going back to some of these studies that are going on out there, there's a real correlation between gratitude and happiness and optimism. And in fact, I've read enough articles out there that have kind of convinced me that, it's very similar to what we understand from our deen. And of course, it's no surprise. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala created us. He knows our mechanisms and inner workings better than we do. That when you sit to reflect on your blessings, you'll automatically feel better. You will feel positive energy from that. And that idea of the glass being not only half full but brimming over, that part that you don't see beyond the other half, those are your blessings. Those are the things that we can't count. We can never count them, but they're there. And they're there even in the midst of what seem like the worst situations, because you don't know how much reward you're getting for staying the course during those difficult situations. And yes, that includes things like tests of life and illness and loss and challenges within our homes. And of course, we should get whatever source of relief to remove that harm that we can from what's available to us in resources around us, the help of others. If it's illness, then of course the aid of medicine and whatever technologies are available. But it all starts with this foundation, and that's really the core purpose of this paper. Just to go back to what we're trying to do here at Yaqeen as well, is that let's get that that conviction instilled in us and that confidence that we're on course. And alhamdulillah, this is a very essential backbone of our deen, is optimism and hope. And inshallah, with that, I will, I think, end the session here. I thank you all. Jazakumullah khair for your participation. And inshallah, hopefully I encourage you all to go and read the paper if you haven't already. I don't know if the link's been added in here since the comments have moved down, but it's if you go to our website, yaqeeninstitute.org, you will see a tab for research, and if you go into that tab, you're going to actually find all of our publications and articles. Alhamdulillah, there's a team of some amazing people who are trying to address a number of topics in all of these areas. And if you have suggestions and thoughts, we'd love your feedback and any questions you may have going forward, as well as ideas, inshallah, as to how to build off of this. If there may be topics that I have not touched on here. As I said, this was the first paper in this category, but I think there are many other areas we can address as well, inshallah. So jazakumullah khair. Thank you so much for your time, inshallah. Assalamu alaikum rahmatullahi wa barakatuhu. Subhanakallahumma bihamdik ashhadu an la ilaha illa anta astaghfiruka wa atubu ilaik. Jazakumullah khair. Assalamu alaikum.